Hi there. Hello, greetings. It is really, really ironic that I had so many issues trying to set up this video today because this video is about really being a hard head. So it's going to be interesting um, to share this. So first of all, greetings and welcome. My name is Ermina. I'm also known as Reverend Tutu, and I started to do these impromptu videos on Facebook Live, and I was enjoying them. They're working out pretty well until one day my mic stopped working on Facebook. It works everywhere else. It's just on Facebook. So I know it's something, there's something in there that needs to be clicked, and the people I've asked don't seem to be able to figure it out, and I can't figure it out for now. And it's not a very high priority thing on my list, so I've kind of put it off, and then all of a sudden when I want to do a video, I can't do it. So thank you, and I want to, those who've been trying to log in and having to waste their time, I really appreciate it. There's a part of me that feels bad, not all of me, but there's a part of me that feels bad that you wasted your time trying to log in and then there's nothing. So this is why I make sure I do the video, even if it means I gotta now take time away from something else to do it. So I'm gonna do this video for you, and the video today is called Transformation as a Survival Response. Now, those of you who don't know me, I present things in a way that is from an angle that uses logical mind, but at the same time with the mysticism put into it. So it's logical mysticism. There's such a thing. So it makes sense, but then you're like, it's coming off the deep end somewhere. So it makes sense, but not really. Actually, that's not true. It makes sense, but it's not what you may be used to. It's coming from a different perspective. So thank you and welcome. So transformation as a survival response. This is important before I even start. I'm not talking about transformation as a means for thriving. I'm not talking about transformation as a proactive attitude or way of being. I'm talking about transformation as a reaction to something that's already happened. So as a survival response. An example might be what just happened with us with this pandemic and all this stuff that's going on in 2020. In case you're seeing this video many years later, a lot of people were taken aback. We didn't know this was going to happen, or we didn't know it was going to happen in this particular way, and so on and so forth. And so we had to then take or have a reaction to it. This is what I mean by transformation as a response, a survival response. Not to thrive, not to plan ahead, but it's something is happening and now we got to take effective measures. So that's the first part I wanted to share. The second part is, this is about inner alchemy, not outer alchemies. It's not about magic, going out and doing something to affect the world in a magical way. Is that possible? You bet your lifesavers it is. Are there ways of doing that? Absolutely. Is that what I would present on a free video online? Absolutely not, because carelessness is of that kind of measure is careless, and I would not want to participate in that kind of behavior. So instead, I'm presenting something that really any common sense person can utilize, okay? So this is going to be using mental alchemy as a way for having a survival response using transformation. Okay, so what exactly is transformation in our perspective? Oh, I should also mention, when I'm speaking to, my videos are geared toward what I call the sensitive free spirits. So there are those people who are highly sensitive. Some of them call themselves empaths. Introverts are not necessarily the right word. They use that as well. They use one of the many personality types and so on and so forth. The idea is this person is very sensitive to various energetic forms, vibrations, and stimuli and so on in the world. Second thing is free spirit, and that free spirited means the tendency to need to have things, or an aspect of walking in this earth that deals with spiritual sovereignty and self-discovery without having too many impositions. That's who I'm speaking to. If you don't follow those two categories, this is not going to work for you. So I want to kind of caution you so you don't waste your time. Okay, so this is for a particular type of people, because then you understand what I'm saying, and you're going to be getting it a little bit easier than those of you trying to fit in to a round thing and you're a square peg or your oval peg. It's not going to work. So if you are a sensitive free spirit, welcome. So the other thing is that my definition of transformation has to do with changing form, but linearly, not vertically. Okay, so trans meaning it is the linear aspect, and you're changing the way you are formed, not just physical form, but mental mindset on a plane, on a particular plane. You're not trying to completely change yourself or metamorphosize into something else. You're shifting your perspective on an angle that is lateral. Okay, so you may not necessarily be growing, but you're seeing things from a different angle, really. So that's transformation. Now, there's many different aspects of transformation, so I can't go into that. The other thing I also want to say about this particular video, transformation happens on an elemental level. That's our purpose in this video. It's on an elemental level. What are these elements? We're talking about earth, fire, wind, water, and metal. When we're dealing with transformation with water, that's one thing. Fire, that's another thing. Wind, that's another thing. And earth, another one. The one for this particular video is about metal. It's about the dust, the technological, the stiffness, the salts that not prevent, but really what they do is help us create form. And once you build more and more of those, they actually make certain forms solid. The more metal that is in a particular form, the more solid it will become, and the heavier and the more earthbound it becomes. So our conversation today is about transforming when we have become too heavy or too metallic or too technologically connected or too stiff. Okay, this is really important. That's what our conversation is, transformation as a response because you're too hard-headed. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. And by the way, when I say too hard-headed, I'm also speaking in a very generic way. It's not an insult. For example, I include myself in this conversation. If you're having to have a response to something that you could have foreseen, there's a pretty good chance that you were too stiff, or we were too stiff in our thinking to make the adjustments prior to this thing happening. Does that make a little bit of sense? Okay, so, and this is a human condition. Everybody does this. This is not everybody. Some people don't. Some people are far enough away that they can foresee things and then act appropriately. But generally speaking, this is a human condition. We sometimes don't see something coming because we were too rigid in a particular way. And that rigidness is a result of salts, of metallic, of metal, of stiffness, okay? And there's only a few ways to loosen things up. You loosen them up with fire, water, acids, alcohols, and there's a few others, right? Now, we don't want to use alcohols because that's not necessarily going to get us to where we need to go in this situation. We don't necessarily want to use acids either, although there are situations where acidic forces can help us make the change we need to use. So I'm not going to talk about neither alcohols or acids, and I'm really going to talk about fire, water, and friction. These are the three ways we can alter metal or the salt or a way of thinking, okay? that is stiff, that is rigid, that is enabling us to flow. I also want to say that technically it's not transformation, it's transitioning. You've got to transition metals before you can transform them, technically. Transition them to more malleable form before you can actually completely change the form, if that makes sense. So these things I just talked about, water, fire, and friction, I'm going to tell you what that means. So I want you to imagine this. For example, we know, and if you don't know, you will know now, that it is not news, it really isn't not new, it's not new that we have a situation with viruses, new forms of, not really new, but viruses returning to the earth and causing issues. And it's not just virus, it's bacteria, it's a bunch of other stuff. That's not really news. How do we know it's not news? It's because we've abused antibacterial, we've abused a lot of antiviral, we've done a lot of things to bring us to this end of the situation, that it makes sense that just like nature always balances itself, that we would have some sort of situation that helps us get back to center. The human being in many parts of the world is very unhealthy right now. We just have not done a really good job at eating things that are that have life in them. We eat things that are processed, and the more we process, the more we take life out of them, and they become these food-like stuff. They're not really food. They don't really nurture our bodies and enable and support us to grow. And so instead, they're kind of killing part of us slowly. So all these different things that we've done to lower our immunity toward what's naturally on this planet, there are a gazillion number of things that could kill us. And most of them don't kill us because we used to have really strong immune system, because we were working the land, we were doing this, we were more active, we weren't sitting in front of a screen, and so on and so forth. So all these various things we used to do helped support our immunity. So we were able to withstand what's naturally on this plane. And you cannot sterilize the earth. And if you sterilize the earth, you're killing life. And I know some people want to do that. I think that's one way of getting around this. Hey, we'll just sterilize the entire planet. Well, that's called death. And really can't do it anyway, because whatever you try to sterilize, whatever's left will become stronger, and it's a never-ending process. You can have sterilized environments, small environments to incubate certain things, but even that's dangerous because it's going to create what we're seeing now, which is sort of like a rebalance of nature. So I say all this to say that what we're seeing is predictable, not just in terms of health issues, which is going to be going on for a while. I mean, this is 2020 when I'm making this video. We will still be talking about this in 2030 something. And we'll have another really serious, based on some of the research I've done, another major issue around the 30s, the late 30s, like 2036, 37, 38, around that time, because we didn't really get the lesson in 2020. We haven't gotten it. And also because we're a large group of people. I mean, there's billions of people, right? So it's going to take a while for us to make that transition completely. So what I want to say about that is transformation of stiffness, inability to see things differently, when you're dealing with the metal aspect of ourselves, takes work. Unlike someone who's more watery in nature, more fluid in nature right now, they're able to literally go around through some of these things that are going to be happening. Those of us who did not do that, for whatever reason, we now have to transition our hard-headedness into something more malleable to deal with what's happening and what's going to be happening. Let me try to make this a little bit more specific. You often hear people say, people meaning psychological therapists and so on, that there's really 3 or 4 different responses. Flight, fight, freeze. I think somebody's calling, there's like fawn, and there's a couple others that are out there now. Well, there's more than just 3. There's more than just 4. There's more than just 5. There's actually so many more, and over time they'll come out. And you know, one of the things about the West is they like to name things and really try to narrow it down into specifics. And there's few more. And one of the ones is actually flow. Flow is another response. You flow, you go with the flow. It's not freeze, it's not flight, and it's not fight, it's flow. But flow itself doesn't necessarily mean you're going along, because flow is part of, it has different angles that you can take from that to take you into a new state of mind. So let me explain what I mean. If let's say the strategy that you employ is flow, it may appear like you're not doing anything, but what you could be doing, one of the things is actually waiting for a spark of light or information, because it's more like you're doing a survey. So here is the attack, and here's the person. And the response is not to fight, it's not to run, or flight. It's not to freeze, but instead it's a flow. It's almost like what was it, the fighter's name? We used to move like really, it's undulation to some extent. And it's actually undulation happens, but it happens after the spark. All of this I'm talking about is happening in like mini microseconds. So it's really hard for me to speak it with and make it sound like it's a process when it's actually happening a lot faster than that. So here's the attacker, excuse me, and then the person who's responding, and the attacker could be a situation, and the response, in that microsecond, there is a spark that says, to, let's say, one of the strategies is to actually, there's a word I used before, besides flow, but to choose a path that is, what word came up for me earlier? Repugnant to the attacker. So the path is unattractive to the situation. It doesn't match the situation. The repugnant, something that's vile, okay? That can happen in a spark of moment, and that vile response can be to any of the senses, and if it's an energy, it could be to any of its senses, okay? That repugnant response stops this end from approaching, okay? Or this energy from approaching. It stops the attacker from approaching. It's actually a defense mechanism that's either using the nose, something that stinks, using the eye, something that's just visibly unappealing. And if you ever heard of the so-called mythology of Medusa, anyone that looked at it would freeze. Well, that's a mechanism of survival response. You freeze, freeze the attacker through the eyes. And that's an actual science that is, well, spiritual science that can be done, right? And we know the stories from something else, and it's been altered and all that good stuff. I'm not gonna go into that. But the idea is to use one of your senses, whether it's something that stinks, something that's visibly vile, that shocks and stops. You can use sound, you can use vibration from your etheric self. You can also use vibration from any of your organs through the mouth. So you can vibrate from any of your systems, something that, again, defends you against the attacker without you actually having to do anything. Those are microsecond responses that quickly is followed by the undulation. The undulation is the movement, side to side, left to right, whatever, that enables the, for lack of the word, the person that's being attacked, I don't know if attackee, attacker, attackee, that enables the attackee to actually move outside or unknown spaces, unknown angles from the attacker. So the attacker cannot see certain angles. Now you're probably saying, what do you mean you can't see? We're not talking about the visible sight. These are all symbology here, okay? So you change the perspective of how you're seeing the world so that the attacker cannot predict what it is that you're doing, because it is repugnant to them. It is something they can't imagine, because remember, everybody operates in some kind of a circle or square or shape of thought. So even the attacker has a framework in which it operates. So you get outside of that framework into something that's repugnant. Those happen in microseconds, and that's a form of survival response. And it's a form of survival response that is used by those who do not have the same amount of power as the attacker. Here's an example. Right now, we've got people who are extremely angry and ready literally to have a race war. Many people have, on the white side, have been preparing, whether you call them militant people or whatever. They've been preparing for lifetimes, some of them, because of the hatred that they have against people of African descent. Some of them have stocked up enough ammunition for the next, I don't know, 50, 60 years. So they're actually over-prepared in terms of weaponry for a race war. African Americans are people of color, really, that are being put into this race war. But notice I say being put into, because the race war is actually something that's controlled outside of both groups. Okay, we won't go too much into that today. But African Americans who don't have stockpiles of weaponry. So we already have in a situation where there is not an equal balance of weapon. So if you were to put both face to face, it would be a massacre on the African American side. It would be a massacre if you were to put them face to face. But it's not going to happen that way, just so you know. So don't worry about it. It's not going to happen that way for a reason. One being, if this were to happen, let me rephrase it. You can't kill off Black people on the planet. And the more you try, the more we seem to proliferate, because it doesn't work. There's a whole other reason behind it, spiritual reason behind it, but you just can't do it, okay? So the race wars are really ways of having certain groups get power over other groups of people. So it's not going to happen. It's not going to be this face-to-face massacre of African Americans in this country. What will happen, though, will be a lot of pockets of upheaval and that kind of thing. But my point is, the strategy by one that doesn't have the same amount of weaponry often becomes a strategy of spiritual movements, okay? Around, above, and in some cases through. These spiritual movements are not necessarily done consciously. That's the other thing. Most people think you have to belong to a specific group, you have to be this, you got to be that. No, it doesn't work that way either. Some people are protected on this planet because of certain purpose, okay? And I'm not going to go into that right now. I know some of you are going to be like, really? I'm not going to go into that. But because of that, there are strategies that are being orchestrated, just like people are looking down to create these race wars. There are also energies looking down to prevent them and to allow bypass and certain things to happen. These certain things that I'm talking about is the transformation as a survival response. And much of it is actually unconscious. People are doing it unconscious. But there is a conscious way of doing it. And the conscious way of doing it is recognizing that it's not, the chemical process is not taking the metal or the stiffness aspect of your mind and going, I'm going to change myself. No, it doesn't happen that way. It's actually allowing either fire, which is putting yourself in that really tough situation, fiery situation, or having fire lit underneath your feet and you have no choice but to move. Water, which is the sadness, the weeping, oh my God, that aspect will also help you become more flexible so you can move. And then the third one is actual conflict and friction. All three of those will actually help you move beyond the limitations of your mind at a particular time. So as a strategy, consciously, not subconsciously, because subconscious is going to happen to many people because there are pockets, there are movements on this game board. There are movements that are being orchestrated by other energies beyond the human body, Okay, so, but consciously, some of us have to literally take specific action to either use fire, water, or friction. Notice I also mentioned earlier there are acidic situation that can change it, and there are others. Besides acids, I'm sure you guys can think of them. I can't think of them right now, but there are other ways of actually transforming metal or the salts within the body or the stiffness or the rigid way of seeing something, okay? So I wanted to share, I think I've said enough. It's been like 17 minutes. I'm going to share what is the solution? How do you use this? Oh, there it is. It's one of my notes right there. In order for someone with a stiff, rigid way of seeing something to alter and be able to use transformation as a survival response, you or we need to get clear. We need a new clear, nuclear. We need a new clear or new clarity, a new way of seeing things in order for us to move into a different state of mind. So what is a nuclear strategy? A nuclear. I'm using those words specifically. Nuclear or nuclear. You've got to get to the essence of the situation. You got to get to the core. You got to get to the nuclear aspect of whatever the situation is. If you're still working on the superficial layers of it, you're not going to make those changes. You got to get to the deeper aspect of whatever it is that you need to change in your life in order for you to alter it. So how do we do that? Oh, by the way, I will note here, it's called the atom element. You have to get to the atom element, which is the atom element, the deep core reason beyond all the stiffness that you have. And I did wear these different metals because I wanted to talk about them, but I'm not sure I will go into. That means you're going from the steel, you're going from gold, silver, you're going from pewter, actually pewter, tin. What are the other metals that I wrote down? You're going from copper and gold. You're going from these different rigid ways, metallic ways. This is Full Metal Alchemy. You're going from these metallic ways of seeing things into the more malleable copper. Okay, that's the transition. What does that mean in terms of your actual practical day-to-day activity? Copper is malleable. It's flexible. It allows you to go, I want to see this different. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. It allows you to undulate. It allows you to flatten up. You can flatten it very easily. One of the animals that survived through nuclear and a whole host of other things has been the roach. And one of its abilities is to flatten its body and get underneath and cross and over. And when it flattens its body, it becomes, it's also reflective. Reflecting means the light bounces off its skin, so you don't know it's there. Well, not we, but whatever the situation is. There are many insects that have this ability of flattening themselves, in addition to using smell and all these other things to shock the oppressor or the attacker. They use those things first, and then the second thing they do is to be able to get underneath many situations, through many situations. What would it look like to go underneath? Underneath usually means you're invisible. You don't let people know where you are, or what you're doing, or how you're doing it, and so on and so forth. That's one strategy. Going through may actually mean you look just like the things that is attacking you. You use that as a strategy. Or you narrow your perspective so that you're thinner, so that you can go through that which is attacking you, right? You belong to organizations that are attacking you, so that you know how they think, right? So that's one way of doing it. So to be able to get to the other side of the attack. Those are some basic ways. Let me see what else I can add to this. Oh, In order to do this, you have to be able to be reflective. If you're emotional, emotion prevent you from actually using these strategies I just talked about for survival. Transformation, although you can use your waters, which is the emotions, although you can use them to transform, it is unwise to actually try to transform without having control over your emotion as a survival response. That's why you hear people say, in a case of an emergency or something is going bad, you want to be with the person that can think on their feet, not the one that's like, oh my God, this is so bad. The tears can help soften them up and make them more flexible, but not in the way you want them to be more flexible, right? Because it's not flexible to make decisions, more like flexible to whatever. So it's not useful to do that. What is useful is to be able to use those tears, those emotions, to go through the process. One of the things that can help is to recognize that there's only two, when you want to get clear about something, there's only two things that you need to look at. What is it you're for? Pro. What are you pro? And what are you neutral about? Not what you're against. Do not focus on what you're against. This will literally keep you stuck. You want to focus on what you're for and what you're neutral. Those two strategies will get you clear, not what you're against. If you focus on what you're against, you become rigid more and more, because it's a mirror. You're getting the exact same thing. So if you're against something, you're going to get more of that. So you focus on what you're for. Let's say you're for peace, for example, then you focus on peace. Let's say you're neutral about a particular situation, you focus on neutrality. Do not focus on what you're against. Those two are the only ways to get nuclear. You want to deal with the protons and the neutrons. Neutral and protons. There is no against on. There is, but a different kind of mechanism. Those are the two things you want to focus on. All right. I think I'm done. There's nothing else I want to add to this. What I just said in 24 minutes, give or take, is maybe longer than that, is really enough if you want to take your time and go through each part of what I said to figure out how that applies to your strategy, because this was very generic and very broad. How this applies to your specific strategy on how you can transform your mind in order for you to get through this conflict, issue, whatever is going on in your life that you need to have a response to. And remember, I'm saying this is for responding. This is not a smart strategy as a proactive strategy. This is, I got to do something. I'm responding to something that's already happening, right? This is what this is best for. When you're being proactive, there are many, 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 many more options that are available to you that are better use of your energy than fire, water, and friction. But when you have no choice, those three can come in handy. All right, so, and then like I said, there's others as well, and so on. The other thing I want to say is this strategy is for metal. It's for the mind. It's for ME, the personality stuff. It's not as effective for water, definitely not effective for earth, because you can't really burn earth per se, so fire isn't going to work in that situation. And also with your body, actually you can burn earth, but we won't go into that. This strategy is more effective when we're dealing with mental, which is the mind. Okay, this is what this is good for. If it's wind, you don't want to throw fire at wind, because you put those two together, you're going to get more fire, right? Friction, it's hard to get friction with wind, because wind kind of does this. So it's very hard to do friction with wind. So this works really well with the metal or the mental aspect of self. I think I'm done. So thank you for watching. I did want to share that there are a couple of things going on, but since I'm not doing this live and I don't know when this will be seen, I'm not sure how much I want to say, but definitely look online to see what else is coming up. I think there's meditation. I don't think there is meditation, and there's the class where we actually go into all of these, the mental, the water, the emotions, the physical, and then the wind, which is breath, and all this other stuff, and how to use those things for mental alchemy. Thanks for watching, and until the next time.